And with that, I'd like to welcome Victoria Ying.
All right, hi guys. My name is Victoria Ying. I am an artist and author. My most recent book is City of Secrets. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the writing process and the art process. At the end, I'm going to have a little demo for you because I did the coloring process in kind of a unique way that I really love to share with you guys. So we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to do a little PowerPoint demo or PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll move on to actual like Photoshop demo. All right. So hopefully everyone can see. And basically, yeah, so City of Secrets is my newest book. It came out Tuesday, and it's been out in the world for just a couple of days now. But I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey into writing and my journey into this book because it is such a unique experience that, especially as an artist coming from my background, which is in animation and as a production artist, I think that the demands are very different than that kind of world. So, all right. Ooh. Okay. So first I'm going to start with the trailer that Toniko Panjota did for us. So start with that. All right, so that trailer was something that I put together with Toniko, and he really just took the book and my only direction was really like try to get the feeling of the book, try to get like the adventurous, big, bold steampunk kind of world into it, and I think he did such a magnificent job, and hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about where it started. So it actually all started with NaNoWRIMO. If you guys aren't familiar with that, NaNoWRIMO is National Novel Writing Month. And in that month, it's November of every year, you write 50,000 words in 30 days. That sounds like a lot, but I was really excited about this because I felt like I just really wanted, something to push me into actually writing and to do something that felt much more complete. I'd done like little things before, like doing little short comics or even just doing, little outlines and things, but like National Novel Writing Month really gave me that accountability partner that I needed in order to like move forward and finish this story. Where this idea came from is actually really different. I actually came up with this idea because I had a dream once about two kids who were running from an assassin in a moving building. And I was like, there's something there. I really didn't know what the story was. I didn't know who the kids were. I didn't know what they were running from. But I knew that there was something really interesting there. So I really took that little seed of an idea and I extrapolated from there. I basically, took that scene and I was like, this is really interesting to me, and like tried to figure out who these kids were, who was after them, why. And that's how I really built the story. I have a million other stories, so picking this one it was just something that really felt like I felt was right up my wheelhouse in terms of what I was interested in. I love stories that are bold and fantasy and have like a friendship at its core. So that was really what drove me to actually write this book. And then, you know, I was doing it during NaNoWRIMO. So the fun thing about NaNoWRIMO, if you guys don't know, is that they actually have like a website where once you sign up, you can like add all your friends and you can do it together. And that was really fun for me because as a student and as a professional still, I am incredibly competitive, and seeing everyone else like add to their word count every day was like a real big driver for me in order to finish this. You know, I think that like doing something on your own without a deadline can meander a lot. Like you can spend a lot of time just trying to find like, okay, well, I'll work on it a little today. And then, you know, by the time that you even get a first draft done, it's a year later. Whereas like NaNoWRIMO, really what it is it pushes you to like get something done as quickly as possible. And yeah, it's messy. Yeah, it's not perfect. But even if you spend a year on it, it's not going to be perfect. So anyhow, when I started NaNoWRIMO, I knew that this was going to be my story. I had a very kind of brief outline, and I was just really excited to kind of get into prose. And, you know, prose is something that I love. I love reading. I read a lot of novels and a lot of fiction. So that was something that I was really desperate to explore, especially considering that like I had this art background, but I didn't really have this like writing background. So, you know, I felt like this would be a really good challenge for me. And it really was. So I finished this novel. It was actually a prose novel, like all words, 50,000 words in 2016. That was my very first draft of this novel. You know, I think that like the thing that I learned with NaNoWRIMO is like you really just have to get to the end. Like you just have to power on through and see the end of your book, because you can't really evaluate the story that you have until you know what the ending is. And in an outline, like my books never kind of stay to their outline. They generally do. Like there's some stuff in there that seems similar, but like once you actually sit down to write it and you actually make it a thing, like you'll find that there's actually other things that you discover as you draft. So for me, it was really important to get that all on paper. All right. So then the next slide, writing. So, you know, as an artist coming from my background at Disney and in animation, like writing was not my forte. Writing was not something I'd ever done. I took one creative writing class at Art Center, which was the college I went to. And, you know, it didn't teach me a lot about writing. All it really did was kind of allow us to have that space to write some short stories. And mostly what I learned is that a lot of people get really personal really quickly in an art in like a college course. So, you know, I kind of didn't really think about writing for a long time. I really thought that like when I was at school, I just wanted to be an artist who got paid and like was able to do this creative work and make a living. Like that was really my goal. So writing was not a concern to me in school.
Vicky?
But do you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you didn't do any sort of prose writing before this book then?
No. That was like it was definitely something that I didn't really think I had an interest in until much later in my career. From college, I was really just like, I just want to work at a studio. I just want to make money, and I want to like make art. Like that sounded like the ideal situation for me. And it wasn't until like I was at Disney, because I was at Disney for 8 years, and I really saw like what they did with story, and I realized that like my biggest fear with writing was that it was going to be bad. And the thing about writing is that yeah, it's bad. It's always bad. And when I was at Disney, the thing that I learned was that they actually, you know, we would do 8 screenings before the movie comes out, and a screening basically is like the entire movie just put together as storyboards, right? And then like it's scored to music, there's voices, there's all that stuff. And the thing that I learned in those screenings was that, oh, these are far from perfect. You know, like by the time we get to the final film, they're great and everyone loves them. But I saw like the process, the hard-won process of artwork and story that was being made in the studio. Like it took blood, sweat, and tears just to get that story right. And you kind of think like, oh, it's a script and the script is good, and then they just move forward. No, not at all. Never. It has never been like that. It always, always, always is bad for a long time. And I mean, they're not always like terrible, you know, but I think it's interesting to kind of see the way that, you know, story kind of evolves, and even the smallest changes really change a story a lot. So I think a good way, if you guys haven't seen this, is the Spider-Verse DVD. So they actually has like an alternate universe version of the movie, which feels like a previous screening where they had a different character. They had like an additional character in it. And it's not bad, like it's actually good, but it changes the story so much just by adding that one character. And then by removing him, like you could really see the way that that story improved. And I think that seeing that myself firsthand made me realize like, oh my God, like I don't have to be great at this at the beginning. I just have to make something and then it can be better. So like that was really the freedom that I needed in order to dive into writing, because I was so scared that I was like, no, it has to be good. And it's like, nope, it actually doesn't have to be good. It just has to exist and then it can become good. So that was really the thing that I took from my years at Disney, was really that like, you know, that effort that like, okay, it may not be great now, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be great. And you just keep working at it until it is. So yeah, like that's like a big part of how I actually was able to overcome my own fear of writing. So yeah, on this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about writing and some of the things that I learned going into it. So like, getting good requires being bad, which is something that I think we all know, especially if you're an artist, you know, like you were a kid once and you drew these like kind of wonky stick figures or bad anime drawings, and then you got better at it, you know, like you practice enough and then you get better. And that's the same with writing. Like you still need to practice. I think that with writing, we all think it's different because we can all write to some degree, right? Like every day you're on Twitter and you post some tweets, that's writing, you know? And I think that we all know instinctually that we can do it. So we assume that like the people who do it for a living or who are storytellers are just better at it, but really they're just practicing more. So like that's something to really consider when going into this, is that, yeah, it's gonna be hard at the beginning because the stuff that you make isn't gonna be good, but it can be, as long as you allow yourself to be bad at it first. The next thing I want to talk about is getting good critique partners. So this is something that like, even in the art world, we also have, right? Like we really want to be able to share our work with someone who can give you good feedback. And when it comes to writing, like finding those partners, those people who will look at your work objectively and then be able to give you feedback, like that is super, super important. And that's really hard too. Like critique partners, that's something that you really, because you have to find someone else who's also like writing and you have to also give them feedback. It's a reciprocal relationship, and it's something that takes time to develop and takes time to find. For me, I was lucky enough that my friend Minkyu Lee was also starting NaNoWRIMO with me. Like we did this together. I talked him into it basically. I was like, you should do this with me. And then because of that, he became my critique partner, and he read my stuff from the very beginning and was able to kind of give me all the advice that I needed in order to like grow this story from being bad to being like readable and something good. So get to the end. That's the thing I mentioned before, like just see the whole thing through. And you can't really see it in an outline. You can't see it in bullet points because, you know, I think that is a map, you know, it's not the road trip. You want to get to the end of the road trip before you can actually go back and assess how it went. If you just look at the map and you never go on the trip, then you'll never know what that's actually like. So it's really important to just get to the end of a draft. If you're sitting with like a script and it's half done, just finish it, because like even if it's bad, even if there's stuff you want to fix, like don't go back and fix it. You want to keep pushing forward and you want to see what the ending is before you can actually assess whether or not the first half is good. When I worked at another studio for a while, we had something called first act screenings, and those never made any sense to me. I was like, what can you know from a first act screening? Like your first act means nothing if you don't know what the third act is. If you're just like waiting to have a perfect first act and then see the third act, like you're never going to get a fully complete story that really works. So like for me, it's always been, you have to be able to zoom out and see the whole thing in order for you to assess it and make sure that actually here are the pieces that are important, here are the ones that aren't. All right, let's see. Deadlines force a vomit draft. So like NaNoWRIMO, what that does is what's called the vomit draft, or like your draft is 0. It's not good, and you have to know that it's going to not be good, because if you want it to be perfect the first time it comes out of you, it just isn't. And then that forces you to, it makes you feel bad about yourself, and it makes you want to quit, because it's like, oh, this is bad. Your taste is better than your ability, right? Like that's always a thing with art. And when you have a deadline, oh, that's spelled incorrectly. Anyways, when you have a deadline like NaNoWRIMO, it really just forces you to get it out. You're like, well, I have to hit this deadline so then I could get that little, you know, fake diploma or whatever it is that you get at the end of winning NaNoWRIMO. So the next part I want to talk about is like knowing what advice to take and what to leave. So as a production artist, I think that's a really, really tough thing for us to inherently understand. Like if your art director or your production designer comes to you and they tell you like, hey, here are the things that aren't working in your story right now, or your painting, right? Like let's say that they come to you and they're like, well, you know, fix this color, fix this shape, fix these things. And when you're a production artist, you're like, yeah, okay, cool. And you do those things, right? But when you're an author and you're actually writing your own story, you have to know which things are actually useful advice and which ones aren't. And that's a really tough distinction, and it takes a long time for you to really figure that out, because you have to know what your story is and what it needs to be before you can understand like what advice is something that's like just from someone's taste or it's just someone else's point of view. When you're working in production, like the goal is really to be a mind reader. You want to look at your production designer, your director, and be like, okay, I think this is what you want. So here, I'm going to make it for you. And that's really the goal of, you know, being a production artist. But as an author, like that person is you. So you have to know exactly what it is that you want in order to understand which advice is actually advice that's useful and which ones aren't. For me, something that's really helpful is thinking about feedback as diagnostic rather than prescriptive. So if someone says something like, this character isn't working for me, here's how you can fix it, I only take the first half of that because it isn't working. You know, like that person pointed this out and I'm like, okay, it's not working. How to fix it though, that's on me. Like I need to know exactly what it is that I need to do in order to fix it. I can't rely on someone else's like suggestion. I might take it, but you know, really you want to focus on the problems and you want to focus on your answer to fixing them and not theirs, because they're a different author than you are. And this is your story and you have to really hold that precious to yourself. The next thing is like, you have to love your book. You have to love it so much because you have to be out there all the time pushing for it. You have to be like, this is great. And you have to convince other people that it's great. And, you know, there's a lot of different times where you have to do that. You have to do that when you're finding an agent. And then you have to do that when you're pitching your book to editors. And then you have to continue to do that during the entire process so that you don't get distracted by other people's suggestions or like what they think it should be. Like you need to know exactly what your book is and what you love about it. And then like once the book is out in the world, you have to be its champion. You still have to be out there and pitch it to readers, to kids, to all these other people. So you have to make sure that you love your book a lot because you're going to read it way more than anyone has ever read any book ever. Then the last thing is to like know your weaknesses and listen to advice. You know, earlier I mentioned, you know, knowing what advice to take, like what things are good and what things maybe don't align with what your vision is. But you should also like be very aware of where you are in terms of your storytelling that might be weak. In my case, I learned that I'm actually really bad at description. I mean, at least I was when I did this draft 4 years ago, right? So I learned that like I can see things in my head very clearly because, you know, I'm a visual artist, but, you know, I had a really hard time writing down words in order to explain that to somebody else, to just be like, here's what this looks like. Let me use words to paint a picture in your head, which I think is an incredible skill and super valuable. But for me, that was something I was really lacking in. I was really weak in that area. So, you know, I wrote this novel draft and then I got to the point where I realized that actually my skills as an artist can make up for my weakness as a descriptor. I knew that like, oh, if I draw this, then I don't have to worry about whether or not the description makes sense, right? Like you still see it because I drew it for you. So, you know, knowing your strengths and weaknesses is a really helpful way for you to know like what medium you should use and where to improve and what kinds of things that you can actually use in your own arsenal that can make you better at this. All right. So the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about resources. This is something a lot of people ask me because when I left animation and I knew I wanted to write, you know, I felt like I was very anxious because I thought, oh, well, maybe I should go back to school. Maybe I should go get an MFA. Maybe I should, you know, learn from teachers and, you know, like people get degrees in this, right? And I'm like, I don't have that background and I hadn't taken a writing course in like decades. So I felt like I needed something to like boost me up. But after talking to a lot of my friends who are published authors, they were basically like, don't get an MFA. Don't bother with it if you don't have to. It's a lot of money. And all it really does is it buys you that space to write. So if you have that space to write, like that's really all you need. So in terms of resources, these are some books that I myself found very helpful, and hopefully they can help you too. So one of them is Robert McKee's Story, which is a book that really went around a long time as an animation. If you work in an animation studio as a story artist, they probably have recommended this book to you. A lot of animated films, we use the structures that Robert McKee talks about, and it's a good book. The next one is Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. That is another one that some people are like, it's too prescriptive. Like it really gives you this very, very strict outline. I still find it helpful. Like for me, when I'm outlining a story, I'll usually use the Save the Cat beat sheet, and that's my outline. When I actually draft though, like things change. Like I'm not like super beholden to that outline. I just know that this is a guideline, so then I know, okay, here's where my characters are going and where I need them to go. However, like how they get there can change. Sometimes where like the story points are, they move around. But I think that Blake Snyder Save the Cat is a very simple and very straightforward storybook and really great for beginners. The next book is Stephen King's On Writing. I have read this book like 4 or 5 times, and it's half memoir, half instructional. Like half the second half is really about writing and the tools of writing. And although actually Stephen King and I write very differently, he and I like have very little in common in terms of writing. Like really getting that peek into an author's life and seeing like his process was incredibly helpful to me in developing my own unique process. The next book is Chris Batty's No Plot, No Problem, which is a very specific book for NaNoWRIMO. I bought that book because I was so jazzed to start NaNoWRIMO, and really it's very helpful in general because what it does is it really helps you get past that first draft jitters. It gets you past your like internal critic who says, this isn't good enough, you need to stop, don't do this. And it really, even though it's very casual in tone, it's still very helpful for people who might struggle getting through a first draft. And then the last book I'd really recommend is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. It's a classic, and you know, for me, when I started doing my graphic novel, I thought, oh, I understand comics. I've been reading comics since I was a kid. You know, like I've literally been reading comics since I was 12, and I understand comics great. I don't need this book. But I did. Like, truly, the way that Scott McCloud presents comics and the idiom of comics and the like breaking down of it intellectually was so clear and just a really great resource for anyone who's interested in making comics. It sounds like it's very academic, but it really isn't. And it really made me rethink a lot of the things that I thought were just like natural or, you know, givens. Like it really taught me a lot about comics and the format of comics. Okay, so today I'm also going to talk a little bit about my comics process. So I just talked about my writing process, which, you know, I wrote this as a novel and a lot of like the things that go into writing novels and writing in general. But so how did I take that into a comic? So my comics process is I will script, man, so many typos. I'm sorry, guys. I script in Scrivener, which is a really great app that it lets you do novels and screenplays and also comics. I like to script in it because it actually has a really strong like categorization system for, they have binders so you can put like research in it and different drafts and character profiles and stuff like that. And I think that like for me, because I like to like write little things all over the place and then I lose them, you know, and then it's not useful to me anymore. But Scrivener, the way that it works is it really works for someone whose brain works like mine. So I can just have all these little pieces of things and then I can put them together later. So the first thing I like to do is script in Scrivener. Since writing City of Secrets, which was, you know, obviously a novel that I adapted, I've written the sequel, which did not have a novel to base off of, so I had to write that from scratch. And I've written 2 other comic scripts too, from beginning to end. And I do that in Scrivener, and I usually do it in a screenplay format. The reason I do that is because I can see screenplays really well, like that format works for me. It doesn't have to work for you. And actually, like writing in comics is such like a nebulous kind of idea. Like some people are really, really good at scripting, and some people really can't. Some people are much better at like figuring it out in thumbnail. That's very normal and not at all unusual. For me though, I like to see it finished. Like I like to see the whole story. I like to see every line of dialogue. I like to see every action beat in order for me to really understand and pull it apart and take it, you know, and to see it all together and be able to edit and be able to figure out like, okay, here's how the story could be better before I actually do any drawing. And that's just for me. And part of that is because I am very like word based. Like I love prose, I love reading prose, and like screenplays are something I'm very used to coming from my background. So yeah, I script in Scrivener, which is again a really great app that I love. And then I do the layouts and thumbnails in Comic Draw, which is an iPad program. I'm gonna show you guys a little video demo of Comic Draw in the next slide. It's very cool, and I think that it has saved me a lot of time. Obviously, like everyone's process is different at this stage, and you know, there's some people who do it in InDesign, some people do it in Photoshop. But for me, Comic Draw was such a good tool because of my process. Because I had a script, it was really easy for me to take that script and then turn it into thumbnails because of Comic Draw as an app. And again, like if you're not someone who scripts and you want to script while you're drawing, then it's not helpful. Like maybe those things that it can do aren't really all that useful to you. But if you are someone who scripts, I'll show you in the next slide the demo, and you know, maybe it'll be helpful for your process too. The next thing I do is I use Procreate for inks. The reason I did this was because I was traveling a lot the year that I actually made City of Secrets. I wasn't at my desk very much. Most of the time I was actually like, you know, doing workshops or traveling with family. I was doing a lot of traveling and I needed something that was mobile. So I did most of the inking on City of Secrets on an 11-inch iPad, which, you know, I recently upgraded to the like larger one, and I'm like, wow, how did I draw this entire book on that tiny little iPad? But you know, I think that it totally worked, and you know, still to this day, I like to ink in Procreate just because I love like the brushes in it. It still feels really nice. So I like that's still kind of my process now. And then the last step is I color and composite in Photoshop. Photoshop still like is the best for delivering files because everyone uses Photoshop, so like I can hand that to my editor and then they'll know what to do with it if they need to make changes. So that's really been helpful in terms of final color. Color also in Photoshop was helpful because I actually had an assistant for color on this book. I taught her how to do my process, and she mostly did like flats and some other stuff, and then I finished it off. But you know, when you have multiple people working on one project, having a consistent program is really helpful. So Photoshop was really the one that we used for color. All right, so I'm going to show you guys my little Comic Draw demo. Hey guys, I'm going to do a quick Comic Draw demo for you, just so you can see how this program works. I super love it, and I would love it if more people got into it. So I'm just going to kind of show you how my workflow goes, and yeah, hopefully you can discover for yourself all the cool tools it has. So on the side here, I have it set up so it shows both the comic and the script. You can do one or the other if you're just doing your script or if you're just doing your comic. I usually like to have them both up, and you can see on the side here that every page, it creates its own delineation so that like as you click through, if I click back onto this page, it'll jump to that page in the script, so you're not scrolling around all over the place. So here I am, and we're at this point in the story. Actually, it's a little off. It's about this one. So what I would do is I create a new page, which is a little plus button, which just creates a new page. Oh, actually, I skipped all over the place. Oh. Okay, here we go. So this is the page. It's page 218. Create a new page. It's got the dialogue, and when you do either a return or if you do a colon, it'll automatically detect it as dialogue. And the cool thing is that you can just click and drag the dialogue. What I like to do is I just kind of like to place the dialogue first. I use my own custom fonts for this, so I like to change all of them to be the font. You can do that by editing your dialogue, and then if you hit add, and you click this, and then you hit add, it'll add it as a style, and so you can apply it to your entire comic. And so this is kind of the page as it is. And then I like to take the panel tool, which is in the same as the dialogue tool. You can also draw panels in either the pencil or the inking panel, either whatever you want. Whatever works for you. So I like to do it this way just because I like basically drawing a panel, and then I can click my dialogue, and up here you can arrange clip to panel, and then it'll clip to the panel, which is pretty cool. And then you could drag the little tail around so you know where your character's speaking. And just kind of lay out your panels based on how you think that you want the flow to go. And then I move around my dialogue so it sits where I want it to sit. Which characters are speaking. I've been working on this comic for a couple months now, so like I have this workflow pretty down, and I kind of understand what I'm doing from here. And then after I lay this all out, then I go into my pen tool, and then I start sketching in my thumbnails. I use the pen tool instead of the pencil tool just because I like kind of this the like black inky look for my thumbnails. And that's just going to be a preference based on whatever it is that you want to do. And that's pretty much how I do these. And then, if I just want to go back, I can do that. I can rearrange pages by just holding and moving that. Whatever it is that you need to be doing in this, it's actually a really powerful program. It's got a lot of cool features. Definitely recommend that you do the tutorial, at least look at it, and kind of figure out all the cool stuff that it can do. It's made my workflow really easy, and I hope it can help you too. All right, thanks guys. All right, so I hope that was kind of a nice little introduction to an app maybe not everyone's using, but that I found really helpful.
That was awesome.
Okay, cool. Yeah, again, highly recommended. I really enjoy using that tool. I don't know a lot of other people who do, but I think that like if you're iPad based, it's really good. They have a desktop version too. I just haven't really used it because I tend to do my thumbnails on my iPad too. So anyhow, it's definitely really cool, and it really gets you to that like thumbnail layout stage really fast. And then like the nice thing is that like I can send that draft where it's just thumbnails and the text laid out like that, send it to my editor, and they can actually read it. Like it actually reads like a comic. Like, yeah, the drawings are messy, but like if they're clear, then it's fine. And really that to me is my very first draft of my book. Once it's in thumbnails, once it's like that, when someone else can read it, that's the very first draft. The draft of the script, which I still work hard on, that's really draft 0, because a script isn't anything. Like you could show someone a script that's just potential, whereas like a thumbnail draft, someone can actually read that. So like that to me is really the most important part. For some people, like they can't do a script and then do the thumbnails. Like they like to actually do them at the same time. And if that's your situation, like that's totally valid. That's a really normal way to work. It's just for me, I like to see it in words. So that's just my process. So making the art. So, the very first cover that I did for this book is on the right. It was called, originally the book was called Ever Barnes and the Switchboard Safe. And this was the novel version that I'd done. I did this sketch back when I was doing the novel version because, I wanted to have a cover. I wanted to have something that I could show. And, in the end, like the book didn't stray too far from this original sketch. But, I had to do some development work on the characters and stuff because my editor, they really wanted something a little older. They thought my characters looked a little young, and we ended up like changing Hannah to be East Asian, which is a choice that I was really happy with actually. So, yeah. So something else that I did, which actually I think helped a lot with this book, was I built a SketchUp model. When I wrote the novel, part of the reason I wrote the novel was because I knew that this whole story was based on a city that moved and was like a clockwork city. And I was like, no way in hell am I drawing that. Like I know enough about myself. I know enough about art to know that like that is incredibly difficult to do and keep consistent. So, you know, when I moved into doing this as a graphic novel, I had to figure out a way to do it. Like I had to be like, okay, this is an incredibly challenging task, but like, what can I do in order to make this easier for myself? And one of the things that I did was I built a SketchUp model. As you can see from this preview, it does not look like a city. What it actually is a bunch of clocks exploded and then with their pieces moved around. So SketchUp is really cool because you can download models from the internet. Like people build models and put them up there and you can do whatever you want with them. So like, let's say that you're drawing the Eiffel Tower. I guarantee you there's a model of the Eiffel Tower in the SketchUp library, right? And then you can just, you know, look at that model and move it around and take a picture and then draw over it and boom, you have a in perspective Eiffel Tower. If you're making something that's fantasy though, one thing that is really helpful is you can download these models, break them up, and rearrange them. You know, like you can build new things with them. It's called kit bashing, right? So like if you were to buy a bunch of model kits from stores and take them apart and use their pieces and build something new, that's called kit bashing. So it's the same thing that I did here. This is a SketchUp kit bash basically that I used to build my city. So I'm just going to show you guys a couple slides of some stills from it. So like this is kind of the zoomed out view. This is what all of those clock pieces look like from far away. But like this is what it looks like if you sit the camera inside of that model. Like what does it look like? And you know, I altered it. I did a bunch of stuff. I extruded a bunch of little towers and things. But this is really the model that I used for most of the book. I would move around and put the camera in different places, change the lens. So that way I made sure that I had something that was in perspective, but was also consistent, right? So like this model, if I move to a different part of the city, I can just move the camera and it's still the same basic pieces of the city. So I didn't use this exactly, right? Like this doesn't look like a city, it looks like a clock. But I use this as the base. I use this as my perspective drawing, and then I built the city on top of it. So I think that like, for me and for a lot of people in entertainment are like really finding those cheats, like really finding those ways to like get around the difficult parts of your job are hugely important to actually doing things with efficiency. And that's what I discovered when I was doing this. I really wanted to make this the most efficient version of my own work that I could. And SketchUp models are a really great way to do that. All right, and then now we're going to get into a painting demo. So I'm going to show you guys how I did the color. So like I just said, I basically wanted like the cheateriest way to cheat my way out of this. And even in the color for this book, although a lot of people are like, wow, it's so pretty, I'm like, man, it is one giant cheat. I basically tried to figure out a way to make it look full color without being full color. I knew that I didn't have the time in order to like really super paint every single panel. I knew that I had to figure out a way to make this look good, but at the same time be efficient. So I'm going to show you guys how I did that. But in the meantime, are there any questions? Okay. All right, so let's just get into this. You guys can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so so basically in Photoshop, this is my inked page. This is what it looks like when I drag it in here. You know, I like the Procreate brushes because they kind of have a much more naturalistic feel. There's something about like all the settings in them that really work. So I make sure that I have a gray background. I don't do this on white because I have white borders. And white borders is really just a choice. That's just a choice that I made because I like how they look. But you don't want to do this on white because it doesn't affect white, which is a big problem if you want to actually put color in it. So the first thing that I actually do is I put on a gradient map.
Nikki?
Yep.
We do have one question about the iPad.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The thumbnail program you use in iPad, can it create dynamic panel layouts?
Depends on what you mean by dynamic panel layout.
Let's see.
I think if I can get clarification on that, I might be able to explain.
Like panels that are not just square.
Yeah, so you can actually use it where you can like take the corners of things and push them around. So yeah, you can do that. You can do, I don't know if it can do round panels. Let me look. But yeah, you can definitely make like angle panels. You can do stuff like that. Let me take a peek right now to see if it can actually do other shapes. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually you can. You can do like all kinds of shapes. You can do oval, rounded, beveled, indent, rounded, skewed. But yeah, if you just grab like the corners, like in any other program, you can definitely just.
Is there like a pen tool to draw your own shapes, I assume?
Yes, there is in the pen tool, but to use the panel tool, you'll need to actually like draw a square and then like adjust the square after, if that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely possible. And like I said, like you can actually change it to be a circle or rectangle or you know, an oval or whatever you want it to be. I don't know, like if I'm thinking about like the Sandman comics and like how like crazy dynamic those panels are, I don't know that it can do that necessarily without a lot of work. And really what these programs are is you want to find the quickest way to get to where you need to go, right? So if you're doing like the models, right? The model, what it did for me is it saved me time. If something like that is going to cost you time, then don't do it. Like I would much prefer that you just draw them by hand. And I do that sometimes too. I sometimes, like if the panel layout is really, really crazy, I'll just draw them in the pen tool and just use the dialogue bubbles in it. Like I won't actually use the panel tool. And you know, in the end, the panels are really just a guideline for me because I draw over them anyways. Okay, so back to my color demo. So yeah, so I get this ink drawing and it's in Photoshop, and I make sure that there's the panels that I want to have color on them aren't white, because it isn't going to adjust to a color because there's no color in it, right? So I have this like kind of 10% gray as my background, and then I have like my inks on top of that. And then what I do is I put on a gradient map. If you guys don't know what a gradient map is, okay, that's a bad one. A gradient map basically is it takes the entire gradient of the black to white and it applies color to them. So these are some of the ones that it comes with, right? So like it finds like the grays and it finds the different colors in there, and then it kind of maps them out in here. But what I do actually for this book is I created my own custom one, which uses like a yellow for the lightest color and then kind of a purple for the dark colors. And then as you can see, it already kind of feels like there's color in it because we have like this range in there. Let me pull up some of my previous ones. Okay, anyways. But yeah, so basically what I would do is I kind of just toss on that gradient map, and then I come in here and I use some watercolor brushes. Sorry guys, I just got a new setup, so I'm moving some stuff around right now. So I use some watercolor brushes. I create a new layer, and I use some watercolor brushes. Okay. And then I just kind of do a little bit of light rendering on these characters and stuff, just so I can make sure that like things are popping off the back. And I just use black and white. So I just use like black here. And because I know that the gradient map is there, like I know that it's going to start changing those colors, right? So like the lighter I go, the kind of more yellow red it is, and then the darker I go, the more purple it goes. So I'm just going to do this one panel so we can move on, so I'm not just sitting here painting this all day. But this is like really the way that I I lay in the color. It's actually just a black and white rendering, but it kind of is fake to look like color. And then on top of that, I actually do this on top of my gradient map layer. I'll create a multiply layer. And then I'll pick a brush that's less textury. Like I kind of just pick something that's very basic. Just a hard round brush. And then I paint in character skin tones. And then I usually have like a couple accent colors. So in City of Secrets, the first one, I used red and like a blue gray. So then I can kind of look at this and be like, okay, like what could use an accent color? And then I'll just come into here and I'll pop, that's very red. I'll just pop on that color onto certain objects and surfaces that I think could use it. I'll use like a blue gray on the ice cream cart. And, you know, as you can see, this process is really fast. I basically got like 80% of the way there in like 10 minutes, right? So this is the process that I used in order for me to kind of make this whole thing feel like, oh, it's in color, but it really isn't, you know? I didn't want to spend a lot of time painting every single thing. So I made sure to like develop a process that felt full color, but wasn't quite full color. So like really finding your own ways to cheat processes and to make things easier for yourself is a great way to like discover new techniques and also a way to make your work look unique. So this is a process that I did, that I developed, that no one else is doing. So it definitely looks like my own stuff right now.
We have a question that says, do you ever use multiple gradient maps in one panel? Is that even possible?
I don't. I mean, I only do it if there's like a flashback panel and I want to like see like, oh, this is in the past, and so it's a different gradient map, just so it kind of signals to the audience like this is not happening at the same time. But otherwise, like if it's all in the same setting, like I want it to feel very unified, right? So I try not to do that.
How did you stumble on this method?
I don't know, like I've been using like gradient maps to build paintings for a long time, just generally, and then I just kind of, you know, try to shorten that process as much as possible. Because if this was a painting, I could actually like do the gradient map, like do my multiply layer on everything, and then do like an overlay layer on everything, and then like slowly push it towards a painting. Yeah. But then I just kind of shortened that process and did like as few steps as possible. Like the thing I like to think about when doing something like this is minimum viable product. What is the least amount that I can do and still get away with exactly what I'm trying to achieve, right? So for me, this was a really great process because it got to that endpoint as quickly as possible.
It feels like a very intentional style, which is cool.
Yeah, and I mean,
your palette in a way.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely feels like, oh, it's like vintage. It's got this printed feeling. So, you know, I developed it and it was like, oh, this works for this purpose. You know, like I actually did this for a different comic project. I did it for a short comic, which is why I think short comics are great. You get to experiment, you get to try things, you know, you get to be like, oh, this is a cool process that I can apply to this other thing. So like I didn't develop this specifically for this comic, but I reapplied it for it because I could see that this was like a really useful method. Yeah, so like I would kind of go through here and I wouldn't use too many colors because again, like I really want to kind of limit the palette. I don't want to make this feel super like have a ton of colors in it. I actually like, generally speaking, really like French comics and things that are you know, not necessarily as mass market as certain other products. So I like kind of a unique look when I do these things. So anyways, this is kind of like the process I would use. And then on top of this, I would actually throw on another layer, and it would just be a normal layer. And this is when I like go back in and actually like fill in some small details. So I would find like a brush that was pretty close to my ink brush. And then like I would use almost like a white. And the reason I use white is because it's lighter than that yellow, so it actually like pops out more as a highlight. And then I actually can draw over my inks too, and then it kind of gives it like a painterly feel. And I only really do this highlight process on things that are important, right? It's like I'm not going to do it on every single character because I don't want your eye to like look at everything. I just want it to look at a few things.
So are you sort of working everything out in black and white first?
I want to make sure that like the picture reads in value, and then the color on top is really just gravy. But that's really why I developed this process, is because I wanted the black and white to hold most of the story, but I also wanted to feel like it had color in it without actually doing full color, because I just knew that would take too long. That's the thing about these books too, like they take forever. Like there's just so much time that needs to go into them for them to be good. And so you have to kind of find ways to like maximize your efficiency.
How long did it take you to sort of get into the flow of your process, and roughly how long does it take for you to complete a page, would you say?
It's hard for me to say because I do the process so separately. You know, like I do the entire book as layout and thumbnail, and then I do the entire book in inks, and then I do the entire book in color. So like those steps are really separated out. I would say that like each page would probably take 6 to 8 hours total. And that's like including thumbnail, ink, and then color on top. Just color, like one page like this would maybe take me 1 or 2 hours, and it really depends on like the complexity of the page and how much is going on.
We have a question that says, did you create some kind of style guide for the project since you were working with an assistant? How did you decide what size to make your final pages? Was that set by your publisher?
Yes. So the page question, yes, that was definitely set by my publisher. It really depends on how much money they're willing to spend on your book. So when I sold this book, it wasn't a size yet, and I had to ask. I was like, hey, can I get a template for the size? And based on how big it was, like I had two options, and the bigger one was going to be more expensive. So if they were willing to spring for it, they could have given me the bigger size. But then they ended up actually giving me the smaller size. At least that's what they told me. But then it printed and it's bigger, so I don't know. But yeah, basically they'll tell you what size that they want it to be. You can kind of, if you have like a specific size, like if you have a square book or something, then that's something that I think you can actually talk to your publisher about when you're pitching it. But for me, like I knew it was going to be a pretty standard comic size, and I just, you know, they let me know like here's the size, here's a template, and I just went from there.
So you're talking
Terms,
purely
oh,
size. Sorry, purely size in terms of the height and width of the book, not necessarily the page count.
Yeah. For this first book, you know, the height and width of the book was something that was set to me by the publisher. The length of the book was really something that I set. It was just based on the story. You know, like even when I was in the script, I had an idea of how long the book was going to be, but it's not until you get to this stage when you're actually doing like color and, or not color, when you're actually doing like inks and you're doing the thumbnails that you actually realize, oh, it's exactly this length. You know, like I was like, it's 200 pages. And then it ended up being like more than that. And that's just because, you know, as you're doing your thumbnail layouts, you're like, oh, I want to spend more time here, or oh, I want to like, you know, I want to have this moment really linger, or oh, like this fight scene that I was like, fight scene takes 10 pages, not 5, you know. So there's stuff that can happen in the script to thumbnail stage that can really mess with your page count. And usually most editors are okay with that. Like they know that you're not tied down to a certain page count. For the second one, however, I was told like, okay, it has to be exactly this size. not sure why, but yeah, so they did tell me like, here's the exact page length, but that was based on like the previous book. They wanted them to match, so that's really why that happened. I'm sure if I pushed back on it, they would have given me more pages, but in terms of like the height and width of the book, that's something they'll tell you, and usually the length, like they'll kind of be flexible on that. Oh, and then style guide question. Yes, so I gave her these gradient maps exactly, because as you can see, I saved them. Like these are actually, where is it? Trying to pull that up again. For some reason, it won't show me. Is it on a different page? Oh yeah, here it is. Oops. Ha. Yeah. So this gradient map is like a saved gradient map. Like I made it and then I named it and then I exported it so she could have it. So something that like, if you want to do this for yourself, what you would do is you take like the basic black to white gradient map, and then you kind of drop a couple dots, usually like 150%, 180%, and 125%. And then you can change these colors in here. So you know this has to be 50%, but then you can also make it like 50%, like in this purpley range. And then this one, which is like 80%, but you can make it like blue. And then this one, which is like 25%, you can make it green or something. And then that's its own gradient map. As you can see, it's different than the one that I made before. Part of it is that those blacks are kind of very black. For me, I like, oops, that one. Like this black is like very black, but if you kind of just lighten that up a little, then it kind of changes that dark black to have a little color in it, which is nice. So yeah, I exported all of my gradient maps and I gave those to her. And that was really helpful to keep that consistency. And then I had a couple pages that I had done, that I had like finished on my own, and then I gave those to her as a guide. So that was really the way that we worked together. But also like she was assisting me. She wasn't doing full color, so like she would do the first. So I would do like the black and white, like the rendering step, and then she would do the gradient map and the multiply layers, and then give it back to me, and I would reapply the final details, like the rim lights and stuff like that. Like that's something that I did. So we worked together on it. So then like if it went too far her direction, I could pull it back. But usually I was really happy with what she did. So yeah. But yeah, so that's pretty much my presentation. That's how I did the color. Just, if I just did this whole page, that would pretty much be how I did it. But yeah, like I think that it's really important for you to find your own process and don't feel bad about cheating. Like if anything, that's the thing I want you guys to come away with is like, I cheated the hell out of this book and it ended up working. And, I think that, efficiency is super important in terms of building a long-term project like this, because it can get really exhausting. And if you have a method that works really quickly and fast for you, that's like the best way to be able to complete a project like this.
That was awesome. Thank you very much, Vicky. So now I think we're going to move on to some questions. I will start with a simple one of my own. Can you tell me a little bit about NaNoWRIMO? Does it last exactly a month, and who convinced you to do it?
Yeah, so it lasts exactly 1 month, all of November, from the very 1st of November to the 30th of November. And it is very cool because they picked this month specifically, partly because we have the Thanksgiving weekend. So then you have that extra time. So if you fall behind, you can catch up on it. And it's, I don't know, it's just so fun because they're like, yeah, we're about to start. And then you have your own little page and, you get going, and it's just really exciting and fun. The first person who got me to do it, I don't know. I think I just heard about it online and I was like, that sounds fun. And I knew a couple other people who were like interested in trying. So I was like, do you guys want to do this? And so I had like a couple friends who were like, yeah, sure. And I think that first year that I did it, this was not the first year I did it. I had tried the previous year and totally failed. Like I tried in 2015 and I just like stumbled and fell and I was like, this is awful. And part of that was like, I didn't know my own process. I didn't know that like, it's okay for it to be bad. Like I was like, oh, it's so bad. I can't even look at it anymore. But for me, like the time that I actually achieved it was the time that I was just let go, and I was like, it's okay, it's just gonna be bad, I just need to finish. Because like there is a tip in that NaNoWRIMO book that's kind of like, if you can't think of what to write, just like, I don't know, spend a bunch of words describing something. Like they sat down for a meal and like, here's 200 words about them eating, you know? And you'd be surprised that sometimes interesting stuff comes out of that. And also you still hit your word count. So it's really just about consistency in that practice. But yeah, I think it's really fun and really, really worth doing.
Awesome. Is it the same as Novel November?
I don't know if it's the same, but yeah, it's definitely, I think, probably related to that.
Let's see, how long did it take for you to complete the project once your publisher picked it up? Did you set a daily or weekly production goal?
Yes. So it took me about a year start to finish. By the time that I had sold it to my publisher, I had a finished script. So I'd already spent about a year working on it, just in terms of writing and adapting the script for graphic novel and also developing the pitch. But it was 1 year of production, and you know, there's other like publishing stuff that happens in there, because like I would send off the draft and then I have to wait a few weeks for her to get back to me with notes and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so it's about a year. And in terms of like daily goals, yeah, I've realized like NaNoWRIMO really taught me what it meant to just chip away at something, to do a little bit every day. And then at the end of it, you have this big, massive project that you completed. And with these types of projects, I know now I'm like, okay, I want to give myself 2 months to thumbnail the book. Okay, how many pages a day do I have to do in order to do that? And it was like 10 pages a day or something. So then every day I just try to crank out my 10 pages and just stay really consistent with that. For inks too, like I know that it's like, okay, well, inks are due on this day, so I need to backwards, you know, do the math and then figure out like, okay, I need to do 3 pages a day for me to pull this off. So yeah, like those things are really important and really helpful just in order for you to like keep moving on it, because they, when you look at the whole project, you're like, oh my god, it's 250 pages. This is going to take me a decade to get anywhere with this. But if you do it just a little bit at a time, 1 or 2 pages a day, then like slowly you're still going to make it. The most important thing is consistency. Just don't fall off, you know, just make sure that every day you're showing up, and then you're doing the work. And then if you fall off for a page or two, then you can make it up. But, and that's the other thing about NaNoWRIMO, was that if you lost a day, if you didn't write for a day, it's okay. You just have to make up like 40 pages, 40 extra words a day, and you're fine. But if you start missing like multiple days, then that gets really, really difficult. Like once you start missing like 4 or 5 days, like the number becomes too much for you to handle. Like you can't make it up anymore. So like that was the thing that project taught me, was like, if you fall off for 1 day, it's fine. Fall off for 2 days, maybe not. And then 3 days is impossible. You will never make it up if you fall off for too many days. So you just want to keep coming up, keep coming, keep showing up, keep hitting those numbers, because otherwise you're going to lose control of it pretty quickly.
So the other question was an earlier question about, what was your agent process? How did you sell the book? Or did you go directly? I know you told me a little bit before this about your process of finding agents and how many agents you went through. Yeah, we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, totally. So my agent process was long and arduous. My very first agent I had when I was working at Disney, and it was mostly picture books. And really, like what we were doing with that was just like side gigs, you know, like it was more like she would come to me with illustration, and I would just be like, okay, here's some illustrations. But then I realized I wanted to write, and then I realized that she and I had very different tastes in terms of story. Like she really liked, you know, picture books, like artful picture books, really beautiful things, like objects like that. And for me, I wanted to tell these like kind of dark fairy tales that were not really her wheelhouse and not really something she was interested in repping. So we ended up parting ways totally amicably. Like we're just like, okay, this relationship is no longer useful to us, so we broke it off. And then I had to go on a hunt for a new agent. That process is called querying, and there's a lot of advice on the internet about querying, but mostly for prose people who write books, not for people who do graphic novels. Part of that is because the whole graphic novel genre is pretty new. So most of the agents who are working in that field are still pretty young, and they haven't, you know, done a lot yet. But when you query a graphic novel, you basically put together a pitch packet. You want to put together your artwork, you want to put together pages, samples, like sequential samples, especially because they want to know that you can actually do comics, not just do pretty illustration, and like a script sample and an outline for your story. You put that together and then you send it out to agents. You want to send it out to as many agents as you can, but you want to try to make sure that they're a good fit. So like for me, my very first round of agents, I sent it to like 25 agents, and I got like 4 people who were interested. And then like I sent it out to another like dozen or so. And in the end, like I had 6 people want to get on a phone call with me and talk to me about working together. At that stage, like it's really interesting because the power really shifts. Because at the very beginning, when you're sending your stuff out and getting rejected, it's like all the power is with that agent. You know, you just need someone to say yes. But then when it switches and you have a yes, and then you tell everyone else, it's like, hey, someone else is willing to rep me, then everyone else jumps in, right? And then you have like 6 people who are like, okay, now you have to pick me, you know? And that's really the stage that is really important, because you want to talk to that person and make sure that they are on the same page as you, just in terms of their taste, what they want to do with your work, how they see your career, all that stuff. It's all really important. And I got my second agent when I was querying that way, and I queried with City of Secrets. And I ended up going with her because she was the only agent who was like, I want to read the novel. And I was like, wow, really? Because it's not great, but sure. And because I knew that she was interested in also my prose work, and she actually was like, I liked it. And I was like, oh, cool. I knew that that was really a big thing for me, because I want to write prose too. I also want to write novels. I don't just want to do comics. So having her really respond to my prose was very much a good sign for me that she was also going to be interested in prose if I brought it to her. I ended up splitting with her only because she left the business. Publishing is hard. Being an agent is hard. And she just like decided that she didn't want to be doing that anymore. So we parted ways, and she's no longer working, which is sad, but it happens. You know, like, so much can happen in your career, and you know, going through multiple agents is actually pretty common. And then my third agent was actually just someone that I knew, and she found out that I was looking and was like, hey, like I'd really like to work with you. So I queried a little bit, but not a lot, because I did like her a lot. And then we ended up working together, and she sold my last book series for me. I have a whole blog post on my blog at victoriaying.com about querying, and it kind of goes into the details of querying and the process and phone calls and all that stuff, because it is a process. And you know, my biggest thing with illustrators, especially people who are in graphic novels, is like, please don't just say yes to the first person who comes to you, because they may not be the right fit. Like, get on at least 2 more phone calls just so you know, like, okay, this is actually the right person for me. Not just because they have a sales history, but because of all these other things that I care about in the long term for my career. You know, I think that like, because we don't do this, like we're so not used to this idea of querying that, you know, a lot of illustrators, like my agent was telling me that she's like, I keep offering illustrators, and you know, I want them to talk to other people, but they keep like accepting within 24 hours. And I'm like, ugh, like you're wonderful. I love my agent, but at the same time, like I really want illustrators to really make sure that they're finding the right advocate for themselves and their work. So yeah, like again, taste really matters. Like if you just want to do like unicorn stories that are fluffy and sweet, and like that's cool, and you know, you want to find an agent who also really believes in that kind of work. For me, because I have a wide variety of interests, like my next book series is a YA contemporary issues book, nothing like City of Secrets. I knew that I needed to find an agent who liked those things too. So, you know yourself, like know what you're looking for and know what kind of work you want to make, and then go out there and try to find like the right agent for you.
That's great. I'm curious, does anybody ever have like 2 agents, maybe like a picture book agent and prose agent?
I think it happens. It's not so common for them both to be publishing. Like I have 2 agents. One of them is my film agent who does like film and television work for me. But in terms of like publishing, they don't usually like it if you have a picture book agent and a prose agent. It's possible. Like that's definitely something you can discuss with your agent, to be like, hey, I want to work with you for picture books, but I also want to write prose. And how do you feel about me working with another agent? And then they can kind of tell you how they feel about that. Because I think some people are okay with it and some people aren't. Like for example, for me, like my agent does not do picture books at all. She does very little illustration work. She doesn't have those connections. She just doesn't, it's just not her thing. And, you know, for her, she was like, I'm not comfortable with that idea of like having another agent, because she still takes 15% of any publishing work I do, even if I get it on my own, which is pretty common. If you have somebody who's like an illustration agent, on the other hand, like someone who's like more editorial, then yeah, some people do have multiple agents like that. But it has to be kind of in a different realm. So like editorial is very different than publishing. So, you know, if you have one for editorial, one for publishing, one for film, like that's pretty normal. But having two within publishing, it's not unheard of. I have heard of some people who have that, but it's pretty rare.
Have you ever thought about self-publishing? Like, the
Yeah, I mean,
question from someone is like, if your agent passes on a project, would you consider self-publishing? But I would assume that because you're hunting for agents, you're not considering self-publishing.
you know, that is a good question though, because like, what if you approach an agent with a future project that they don't like? It's possible. That happens all the time. And that's something that you should ask on your phone call, to be like, what would happen in that situation? Because yeah, there's definitely a possibility that they'd be like, this project is not for me, but feel free to do whatever you like with it. And for me, like, I wanted an agent who would never do that to me, who would be interested in everything that I make. So that's definitely not something that I would find to be ideal. But yeah, that's definitely possible. I know people who've done that, who are like, I have a novella that maybe doesn't have a home, and what if I self-publish? And that's definitely something that like you can discuss with your agent, because your agent is also someone who's going to guide your career. So they're going to also have input based on like, do I think this is a good idea for you as an author? You know, like not just in terms of you putting that work out there, but also like, is this a good idea for your brand or whatever? So that's definitely something that, again, can vary between agents. For me personally, I just don't think that if my agent was like, I don't really believe in this project, then I'd be like, either A, I like leave that agent, like I'd be like, well, then we're not suited for each other, or I would do something else, like I would make a different project.
Let's see. Can you talk a little bit more about once you did have an agent and everything, and what was the selling process like?
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's called submission. When you're on sub, like that's a really exciting time, and it's really scary, but it's very cool. So you work with your agent for the first, I don't know, however long it takes for you to get your pitch ready. For City of Secrets, I worked with my agent Heather for like 3 months on it. And a lot of that was because I was adapting my novel into the script. So you know, there was time I had to go back in there. And I really wanted an agent who was developmental, which is something that not all agents are. Developmental agents are people who have an editorial eye and will actually like help you editorially with your work. Not just like, I'm going to take this thing you made and sell it, but like, I'm going to take this thing you made, we're going to work together on it, and then I'm going to sell it. And that really depends on what you want. Like, if you don't want that, then that's fine. And make sure that you know you don't want that. Like, you're like, no, I want my work to be exactly what it is, and I want no input, and I just want her to like take it out there. Totally fine. That's a thing that some people want. For me, because I was so insecure about my own writing, I really wanted an editorial agent. I wanted someone who could like look at this and be like, here's what I think. So that was a big part of me finding my agent too, is like sending the work out and then being like, what would you change? What about it do you think could be improved? And based on their notes, it really informed me a lot about whether or not I wanted to work with them, you know, like, so the last book I sold with my agent now, it's a book about having an eating disorder and being Asian American, right? Like, those are very, very specific topics, ones that I can speak to that maybe they can't. And when they gave me their notes, you know, like, there was one person who gave me like notes like, oh, maybe she should, you know, like feel this way about it, or, you know, like there's some very stereotypical kind of eating disorder stuff. And I was like, no, that's not at all how eating disorders work. So I knew that she and I just would not get along, you know? So like that kind of stuff is really important when you're finding an agent, is like, you want to know like what the developmental side of it is, like how much editorial that they have. And also like, if you agree with their editorial, because my agent that I ended up going with, like, I loved her notes. I was like, yes, agree, 100%, you're right. You know, like, these are the things that I think that you caught on to that I didn't see, but I think that you're actually right. Like, that kind of stuff is really, really important. So anyway, so I worked with my agent, Heather, and we worked on this for like 3 months, getting the script ready, getting it to a point where we were both happy with it. And then she sent it out to, I want to say, 8 places, like 8 editors. And that's very scary because you're like, oh God, what's going to happen? And, you know, the editors, like, they'll read it when they have time. But based on who your agent is, like if you're with someone who people are like, oh yeah, that guy, they represent a lot of good people, then they'll open your letter first. Or like if they have a relationship and they're like, hey, I have this book, and then they're like, oh my God, I can't wait to get that proposal. And then once they get the proposal, they'll look at it, and then if they like it, they'll let your agent know to be like, hey, we're interested. And then they take it to something called acquisitions. And in acquisitions, that editor brings it to all the other editors, and they look at their entire slate and they're like, okay, we think we should go for this. We think we should buy it for whatever reason. Like, oh, we don't have a fantasy. We need a fantasy in that genre this year. Or, oh, like that book sounds really important and something we really want. So yes, we'll take it there. And they usually have acquisition meetings once a week. So based on like when you submit, you'll hear back. And so this is like getting to like the real nitty gritty of what happens during submission, right? So they'll take it to acquisitions. If they want to offer on it, then they will. There's something called a preempt offer. Preempt means that they're like, here's our best offer. We're going to give you X amount of dollars. It's a lot. And don't show it to anyone else. Like no one else can bid on it. We are preempting this. If you, like, here's a bunch of money, take it, you know, basically. And you can take it or leave it based on your agent. You and them can make that decision. And, you know, you talk to the editors. You want to make sure that they also, again, like you want to make sure that they mesh, that their vision for your book is the same as yours. But, you know, if you turn down that preempt and then other people come in with offers, then if you have enough offers, usually like 3 or more, they do something called an auction. So then your book goes to auction on a certain day, and all the agents or all the editors have to come in with their best bid. And their best bid also comes with like marketing plans and like, here's your editor, here's like what we're going to offer you, here's what we have. And going to auction is great. It's really good because like that's when you'll get the most money because everyone's competing, right? So like usually there's 2 rounds of auction, 2 or 3, depending. And then like your agent will look at them and be like, okay, these are the top 3. Everyone else who's not in the top 3, sorry, you guys, you're out, you know? And then they take the top 3 and then they're like, okay, here's the top bid in the top 3. What do you reoffer? And then they'll come back with another best offer, and then you take whoever is, you know, whatever, because like maybe the best offer, the best money isn't with the editor that you really like. You know, like if you really want to work with an editor because you're like, they really get me, I really love their vision, I really want to work with them, but they don't have the best money, like you can still go with them. Like that's really up to you. And like that decision is really, really important, especially for your book and who's going to champion your book, because the rest of this process is going to take a year, 2 years plus, you know, it's going to take a long time. And that editor, it has to be somebody who you really believes in your book too. And then like, let's say that it doesn't go well. Like, let's say that you send it to these 9 agents or these 9 editors, and everyone just is like, hey, like, thank you for sending this to me, but like, this isn't for us or whatever. Like, let's say everyone says that, right? And then your agent will usually come to you and be like, hey, like, here's the response we got. Here are the notes. Because sometimes there'll be notes. Sometimes they'll be like, here's why we don't think it's for us. And then you can be like, okay, well, do I change it? Like, is this something that I think I should change? And if not, your agent can go out to more editors. Sorry, like your agent can take it to different editors, or maybe at smaller houses, like smaller publishing houses. And then you can kind of see what response you get there. And, you know, again, you can choose to rework it or not. And then if you just choose to not do it, then, you know, you can always move on to a different project. So that's kind of how acquisitions and submission works. Your agent should absolutely always send you a submission list when they sub. So they should send you like, here's all the people I sent it to. Here's the ones who, you know, responded right away or whatever. And that way, like, you kind of are in the loop all the time. If your agent doesn't send you a sub list, like, that's really bad. Like, that's not normal. And you should kind of know what's happening when your book is on submission. But yeah, I hope that answered. That's a very long answer, but yeah.
That was an awesome answer. That was the most informative. I've learned so much. So yeah, I think we're nearing the end here. Does anybody else have any questions right now? Feel free to type in. Well, I think we got time for like one more. Any advice for visual design?
I mean, I wish that I had more time for this, like working in film and then working on this book. In films, like it's cool because you get to spend like a year just concepting things out. Like, what is the best answer for this question, right? Like, what does an ice castle look like? What is the absolute best answer for that? But when you're doing a book like this, you don't have that time, and you kind of just have to like rush through it and be like, this is my knee-jerk response, and maybe it's okay, but maybe it's not great. And if you can build that time in for yourself to really do that visual development and that design process, that's great. And if you want that, you can ask for that. Like, that's the other thing. Like, people always ask me how much time this took. I say a year because I asked for a year. If you ask for 2 years, they'll give you 2 years. If you ask for 3 years, they'll give you 3 years. Because for them, they just want the book. It's not really like, oh, well, you can't complete it fast enough, so we don't want it anymore. Because, like if you're working full time and working on one of these books, there's no way you're going to do it in a year. The labor is just too much. But, if you want to build in that time for yourself to really be like, okay, I want to spend 6 months just concepting, then that's definitely something that you can consider doing. I wish I had done that, but I did not. I kind of just was like, here it is, this is what it looks like. And I would design things on the fly. Like the very first time that you see something, I'd be like, I'm designing it right now as it's on the page. And I don't think that's the best method, but it again, minimum viable product is just minimally good enough to move on.
Cool. And finally, tell us a little bit about your upcoming projects.
Yes, absolutely. So currently I'm working on City of Secrets 2, and that's going to be called City of Illusion. That comes out July 2021, and that will be the completion of this story. And then after that, I have 2 books coming out with First Second. The first one is called Hungry Ghost, and that is going to be published, I don't think we have a month yet, but 2023. And then hopefully the next book is going to be 2024, which is an untitled, unannounced project. Also, I am working in development right now at Cartoon Network on a pilot of a very cool thing that I really hope everyone will see someday.